Welcome to the Fatigue Files, a podcast that explores fatigue conditions from as many angles as possible while pushing the boundaries of thinking about fatigue as a signal to the 21st century and beyond. Cutting-edge thinking, practical strategies, thought-provoking explorations. They're going to all be here, and I'm your host, Anna Greer, welcoming you to this edition of the Fatigue Files. So welcome again, everybody, to another edition of the Fatigue Files podcast. And today I'm so delighted to have with me Patricia Kolbe, who is an incredible person with an enormous amount to bring to the whole field of exploring fatigue and personal development and spiritual depth. She's a coach on Ari Whitten's amazing Energy Blueprint program, which is multi-layered health optimization science. She's a fully qualified Gupta coach, which many of you will be familiar with what Ashok Gupta does. She's got 2 master's degrees. She did 5 years of doctoral research in Asian religions, specializing in looking at the mind-body interface and self-development practices in those traditions. And she's done biomedical research. So incredibly rich tributaries there. Patricia.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, I'm so delighted to have you. So one of the things I'd really love to explore with you, Patricia, is that relationship between healing in a broad, deep sense, and even bringing in maybe levels of evolution in the self with the whole journey into recovery for people who are struggling with complex chronic fatigue conditions. I wonder if you've got any thoughts about the distinctions and the relationships between healing and recovery.
Yeah, well, I think, if we're looking at it, even if we look at the etymological roots of, the words healing or recovery, if we think about it from that perspective to start, recovery is a restoration to baseline. That's basically what that means. And then healing would be something that has a much broader context, right? So the etymological root of healing, it really means wholeness. And I think for many of us in the space where we're working with complex chronic conditions, recovery isn't going to be enough, that we actually need to go much deeper and much further, because for a lot of us, where we started wasn't that stable before our, whatever the precipitating factor, whatever dropped us into chronic illness, whatever that was, that even prior to that, we were not in a state of vibrant health. And so that so recovering to our baseline leaves us vulnerable in some ways. And I think the other factor is, and this might get a little bit complex when we're talking about it, but if we're talking about total allostatic load on the body, because that's how I look at these conditions, really, that what has happened over time is that the allostatic load, that is the stressors from all causes. So these can be physical stressors, chemical stressors, microbial stressors, psychological stressors, histories of trauma, that the total stressors from all causes have overwhelmed the system. And that to truly heal, we need to liberate all of our resources. And that requires a much deeper dive. We can't just stay on the surface. For most of it, we can make a lot of progress on the surface. There's a lot of progress that can be made through lifestyle, simple lifestyle interventions. And I love that stuff. I love it because layering that stuff can get us really far. That's why I do the work that I do. But I think for most of us, it needs to go, full healing requires a very, very deep dive to liberate all our resources. Yeah.
There's potentially another dimension of healing here as well, in the sense that I personally believe that it's possible to be deeply healed while ill. In other words, I would even take those in a slightly different direction. And I've known many fit, agile, physiologically well-functioning people who I wouldn't describe as healed individuals, although they're doubtless on their own path. But I think there's something really profound here about the capacity to work on healing, even while you're not getting the kind of recovery you want. So my conviction is that even people lying in a bed who are bedbound can be working at a very deep level on very profound forms of healing.
I completely agree with that. I absolutely agree with that. Yes.
And I almost think, Patricia, at the risk of sounding provocative to the whole community, that chasing recovery can become counterproductive.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And there is something here about trusting the layers, falling back into the process in a very deep, expansive, open way that fundamentally trusts the multiple intelligences at work in the human body, the human psyche, and the human spirit, and even in human social relations, to allow that deeper healing and to stop chasing recovery in a way that it's possible, isn't it, to live at full tilt anxiety about not recovering.
Oh, absolutely. That's what people get stuck in the cycle. Yeah, that's a huge trigger. Exactly. Absolutely. And acceptance, I really do believe with all my heart that acceptance is the first step. And my own mentor actually told me that. I was 10 years into chronic illness, and she was shining a mirror on me and showing me the ways that I hadn't accepted in my current circumstances. And she said to me, if you haven't accepted this, you haven't even taken the first step towards healing. And for me to hear that, I'm like, what are you talking about? I've been working on this for 10 years, but it was, I understand now in retrospect, what she meant, that I was constantly that searching of what's wrong with me. And I'm trying this and trying that. And that it was very, it was keeping me trapped in that state, in that stress cycle, in the nervous system dysregulation. And it also takes energy, So if we look at energy and fatigue, and for those of us who've experienced deep fatigue, we might have the gift of starting to recognize what drains our energies in ways that we couldn't have known before. And resistance is a huge energy drain. When we're resisting what is in any given, and it can be something as simple as the weather, so maybe prior to getting ill, you just feel like disgruntled or, upset because the weather isn't what you wanted that day or whatever. And then, on the other side of it, for me, I can recognize how much energy I'm spending resisting or having negative feelings about things that I have no control over, or even, I guess, some things that I have control over, but I'm just using that as an example.
It's a really good example because it's so everyday. And of course, as spiritual practitioners, the weather's a wonderful invitation to practice, that fundamental distinction between trying to control external circumstances in order to feel okay.
Yes, I think that's so great. Yeah.
And learning that actually the key is within, it's the inner. And and actually, I think unless you fundamentally accept something, you can't begin to deal with it anyway. It's like, if I was on the London Underground or, the New York subway or something, and somebody put a gun in my face, unless I accept that as reality, I'm not going to respond to it resourcefully. I might react, I might stress out, I might have an extremely unresourceful response because I haven't gone, okay, this is what is. Mm-hmm. How do I deal with it in that much more kind of radically peaceful way that deep acceptance brings? And I think people think when they hear people saying about accepting the situation of an illness, there's almost an implication there of passivity, which of course is not at all the case.
Resignation. There's like this equating it with resignation, which it is not. It is not. Resignation, in fact, is a masked resistance. It's still negative. There's still a very negative, right? So,
yeah, I'm just thinking about that resignation as resistance, because that's resisting the organic possibilities that lie in the system as well, right? And one of the things that I've really learned through having, quite serious MECFS has been how plastic or mutable or intelligent, how organically alive the body actually is, and how the body mind is actually one co-emergent system. There's not a split. Okay, we can talk about emphases and distinction, but essentially the mind is distributed throughout the body and beyond the body. And then, of course, with spiritual practice, taking it even deeper there into the body as a portal to all these immense possibilities that come out of the intelligence of life.
I mean, the intelligence part is so, so, so important. And so for me, what I've learned to do, not that I'm always not that I'm always capable of it in every moment, but what I've learned to do is label everything positively. See everything this is an intelligent response to something. And so we know if we look at mitochondria, for example, that they have these dual roles of defending the cell, going into the cell danger response and producing energy. And that when they're not producing energy, when they're in cell defense, there's a reason. It's an intelligent response to protect us. And it can be from any number of threats. Now, this response can persist abnormally, that we can get stuck in a cycle that is no longer needed, so to speak, and that we can, so there's lots of things we can do to help ourselves shift out of that. So my perspective, and this goes back to the body mind and not looking at things as separate and distinct and seeing intelligence in every cell. We see this is replicated over and over and over throughout the body, on the cellular, even looking at the organelles in the cells or looking at the nervous system response or looking at the brain, the brain's impact, the nervous system's impact, and vice versa, so, anyway, I actually forget where I was going with that, but I think it's the intelligent response part.
Really beautiful, because what you're implying there is a pattern that runs through almost in a fractal way through layers.
Exactly. That was the word that came to me, but I didn't use it. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yep.
It's the layers of the self, isn't it? Right down to the most minute dimensions so the mitochondria open and close, we open and close, the nervous system opens and closes, the heart open and closes.
And all in conversation. So it is a dynamic system, and it's incredibly complex.
It's a cascade, isn't it, of interacting, organically connected, never separate, dynamic aspects. And I think that's part of what makes it's so complicated sometimes for people when they think about getting well or going on that journey, because there are so many factors that we potentially need to address. But what strikes me here is that the simple insight, and I love this, I know Ari really has this central commitment to living in line with basic biology. Yeah, basic biology.
Absolutely.
So the answer actually at root is kind of simple, even though doing that in the 21st century is multi-layered because of the multiple layers of assault under which our bodies now.
Exactly. Yeah. And that assault piece, it's so both I completely agree with. And this is why, it wasn't, I think back sometimes to my ancestors and, the whole trauma piece, like sometimes I look at my grandparents and, they had a lot of traumas that they handled in different ways, so, or a history of trauma themselves, but they weren't bedbound, so there was a part of me that resisted that was a piece of it. It's like, well, if that were the case, my grandmother couldn't have, because I knew her history, her personal history of trauma and childhood trauma. But I think your piece about the 21st century, now that we've moved into this time where the modern world is almost perfectly designed to destroy our health, really, in all these myriad ways, that we can't afford. The assaults from too many directions are too great, and we can't afford to carry. And in a way, it's an invitation that we can't afford to carry these maladaptive ways of functioning. And I'm not talking about the physical stuff. The physical stuff is different, but I'm just saying the psychological, the traumas that we've carried, either through our own personally or through our ancestry, like that we can't carry it anymore because, again, going back to this allostatic load, the total body burden is too great.
And I think those structural conditions so often get overlooked in many conversations about fatigue, as if an individual lives in an individualized bubble in which they can do, they can get certain kind of well-being from certain practices, irrespective of all that environmental allostatic load, or irrespective of the structural conditions that mediate that. And for my money, I think people fatigue they're almost like beacons of warning to wider society that, fatigue is a sign, in a sense, it's a sign of a pathology. And in this sense, it's a sign not only of an individual body that's hitting a level where the fatigue is a signal that's making people feel ill, but actually it's a signal of a wider pathology, of a socio-political, structural, communal pathology. And by the same token, I feel that people who have fatigue, who are learning about the depth wisdom of well-being, the depth wisdom of functioning, are potentially also kind of prophetic in a really invitational sense to the rest of society. I think people with fatigue are at the forefront of a kind of revolution of awareness, not just in relation to physiological, emotional, and mental health, but potentially also spirituality. Because many of my clients, I must say, I find are in processes of awakening, that actually they know that in their journey, something much, much deeper is taking place in their life. And they sense that fatigue is a deep transformer, even if at that moment they can't feel their way to a point where they can really kind of relax into that and find more well-being, because they're at a stage where maybe they're more stuck, maybe they've got trauma, maybe they've got some inner stuff that needs cleansing, or maybe they've got crap, circadian hygiene, or they haven't ticked all the boxes of all the layers. It seems to me, Patricia, that this community of people are on a very deep journey that has collective implications.
I agree. It's a real invitation. I would say not everyone's on it, but we are deeply invited. Those of us who have been so affected, so ill, we are deeply invited. And it's sort of like your mission, should you choose to accept it, right? Should you choose to accept it? And that's the piece. And I think for some time for a long time, I resisted it. And my whole focus, I was a very intense achiever prior to this. I mean, really. I mean, when I got ill, I was working full time in financial services. I was doing a full-time PhD. I had just moved into a house an old house that needed repairs and renovations. I was doing volunteer work. I had a stepson, and what's amazing to me looking back now is I didn't think that was a big deal. Like I think that was like, well, of course, I would have basically the equivalent of 2 full-time jobs plus all this other stuff. And for so long after I got ill, and I don't need to, I can go into the reasons why, or I don't have to, but my whole goal was just to get back, like, how do I fix myself so I can get back to life, and I think about it now because, like, as far as I was concerned, I wasn't living anymore. Like there was no, like I wasn't like, as if my life, someone had pressed pause on the life button, which I think is, and of course life is unfolding every minute. It's now and always now, like my life never, it's silly to me now. But anyway, it was like, I was like a boxer in the ring. I got knocked out. It's like, where's my coach or manager, whoever, to splash water in my face and push me back up, because that's all I wanted. I just wanted to get back into the ring. And there was a deep, deep process of surrender that needed to happen. Ironically, I might have gotten better a lot sooner if that wasn't my goal. It took me a long, long time.
Exactly. It comes back to what you were saying about acceptance.
Yeah.
The process hadn't really started until that moment when you just surrendered, accepted it, and came at it with a completely different energy as a result. And
accepted the invitation, which was getting back to your point about, the word you used was prophetic, that we do have this opportunity to be very, very different, to move through the world very differently and model that for other people.
And there's an analogy here to my way of thinking that kind of just going for recovery and missing the deeper invitation is like when you meditate just to calm down. The call is to depth. The call is to depth, and the call is to not just a return to older wisdoms, although that's important, but there's something about embracing being an earthling, a creature, an embodied, intrinsically embodied being with the intelligence of the body, but also something deeply present and future-facing in terms of that prophetic call to another world. And I kind of think here of Arundhati Roy's statement about a new world is coming, and on a quiet day I hear her breathing. Well, to me, people who are suffering from fatigue have the potential to hear a new world breathing and to actually be part of that breathing. And I believe that even if someone's isolated and bedbound, because of the way that we're all unified at the level of consciousness, because of the way in which when we work on ourselves, in a sense, we work on the world, because we are intrinsically interconnected, interrelated. It comes back to what you were saying about moving through the world differently, or being still in the world differently.
I absolutely agree with that. I do.
So in your own experience, Patricia, with your own journey, how have those layers unfolded? Because your academic background and your interests bring together, the biomedical, you've got these two fantastic coaching roles, and you've got that deep study in Eastern intelligence around mind-body. How do those layers unfold for you in your autobiographical journey with all of this?
Well, getting back to your point about the difference between doing meditation for, to calm the nervous system, I actually have the experience of at one point deciding that I was going to let go of all of it. Like I was doing all of the things, for all of the reasons, to restore my health. And at one point I decided to take a more spiritual approach, and it wasn't about my health anymore. It really wasn't. It was like, I'm going deeper with this and seeing what's here for me. And I started meditating quite a bit at that time, but not for the purpose that I was doing it before, not for the purpose of balancing my nervous system or whatever. And, wouldn't you have it that my health improved so much when I stopped doing it for that reason, which is so, I'll say it's counterintuitive, but I think a lot of us have that experience, that we, we do. It's, paradoxically find that to be the case. But I will say, for me, it really is all connected. And this is why I don't lose the physical stuff. I don't, because I really, really find that bi-directional support works both ways. So I'll just give you a couple examples. I noticed, so I suffered from lifelong depression. And I noticed that when I started eating more fruits and vegetables for my health, right? This had nothing to do with my mental health. This was about, I'm ill, especially leafy greens. When I start massive amounts of leafy greens, massive amounts of fruits and vegetables. I know not everyone can do that because some people there's certain sensitivities, and I had certain sensitivities, but luckily not to leafy greens, that my depression lifted. Once I started eating 12 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, my depression got so much better. And I have a million examples of these little things that I did for physical reasons, taping my mouth shut at night. That might sound crazy, but people can look into that. It makes a big difference. How am I breathing? Am I getting full body sun exposure for those people who are able to do that? I know in parts of the world people can't. How's my circadian hygiene? Am I staring into my phone, blue light in my eyes at night, right? So that actually, I found over and over that the physical stuff does impact me, not just emotionally, but and this is where the spiritual stuff gets a little sticky. So sometimes I have trouble, using that word, but somehow I really feel like my capacity to open up is supported by my healthy physiology and vice versa. So that I think getting well physically, and I don't mean like recovery from a chronic illness, but I mean changing my lifestyle to stop living the way I did in the past and living in a way that's more congruent with my biology, as you mentioned earlier, that's really supported a deeper opening.
I would agree 100%. That's also my experience. And for me, it comes about is the issue here is alignment and really understanding that the body is also spiritual. I mean, I think in the West we've had this mind-body split. Yeah. And long before that, we had the kind of spirit-body split, through misreadings of Christianity and all the rest of it. So we've got all that going on. And to me, those physiological practices are about aligning with spiritual commitment. And in my experience, the energies that come through the body when you have awakening experiences require and demand and push the body to a nervous system expansion of capacity to hold those energies, so that then you're metabolizing, and you're increasingly stepping into a different energetic capacity. And in order to do that, I think you do need to be faithful in caring for the body as a hugely important expression of your spirituality. To me, it's a misunderstanding to think that you can be, that your spiritual practice is separate from life. Everything is sacred, right? Everything comes down to that central commitment to faithfulness to what we're given, the capacity to heal. And that doesn't mean, of course, that you can't have huge spiritual experiences and grow and heal while you're ill, because actually I found that I did. Deeply transformative things were happening while I wasn't physiologically able to really kind of step out in the way that I now can. And one of the big needle movers for me was Ari's program, was the energy blueprint, because it started helping me layer in all those layers that you were talking about, circadian hygiene, diet, all those things are hugely important. And I find myself struggling a little when people say, oh, don't worry about that, just focus on calming your nervous system. It's almost like another mind-body split. It's almost like a nervous system rest of life split. And do you know what I mean? It's like a new binary. And actually, I sort of think, the key here is opening to all of it in a really gentle, iterative, step-by-step, humble, careful way that enables you to just keep on moving in a certain direction towards deep healing, whatever that means and in whatever layers you most need it.
That's right. I completely agree with that. And that also speaks to you just start where you are, and we don't focus on what we're not capable of doing right now. Okay, fine, I can't have vegetables. My digestion is too disordered. I get terrible symptoms, whatever, So we don't worry about what we can't do. We start with where we are and what we can do. And we take those baby steps, and the power of layering. I mean, that is where all the power and healing, I think, happens. These kinds of conditions. There might be other conditions where there is a magic bullet. There is no magic bullet in these conditions. So it's layer on layer. And I completely agree that you can do the deeper work, and some of it does require enormous physical resources when that happens, right? So the fact that things have been suppressed, if there is, for example, deep emotional work or emotional healing that needs to happen, sometimes that's an intelligent response of the body, because there isn't the capacity. We don't have enough energy in the system to process this. So also forcing yourself into deep inner work if the energy isn't there. But if we honor our resistances, so our bodies kind of show us what's too much. We just don't listen. If we start really paying attention and honoring when our bodies say, okay, this is too much, that, but always staying on that edge, not making that an absolute. Oh, this is too much, so I'm never trying it again. It's like, okay, this is too much today, or this is too much, at this time or this hour or whatever. And I think that's true for that's true for the physical stuff, and that's true for the emotional stuff, and that's true for the spiritual stuff.
And what you're saying here about not focusing on what you can't do is so key, just as a matter of neuroscience, because the reticular activating system is going to look for more of what you tell it is important at an unconscious level. It's that thing, I always use this example, but if you buy a new car, suddenly every other car on the road is the same car. And it's not that you've changed the world in some amazing way. It's just that your reticular activating system's gone, oh, that's important to you. So if I'm always, and this brings us back to, I think, to the earlier conversation about constantly chasing recovery, because there's a real danger there that the signal you're sending to yourself repeatedly is, I'm not well, I need to recover. And there's a kind of energetic desperation that comes into it, no matter how muted, that the system, the unconscious mind, picks up on and will replicate. And so what you've just said about focusing on what you can do and what you have got and what you can feel grateful for and what you can relax into, not only is it really good neuroscientific sense, but it's also really good nervous system sense. It's sending a completely different message to the whole system because the fundamental orientation is completely different in the energy there. So I think we're back again as well to that whole thing about acceptance and the importance of a deep practice of surrender, not resignation, but almost the kind of falling back into trust and coming into trust with the body again. I really heard that in what you were just saying about trusting the body when the body says, hey, this is a bit too much for me right now, to really respect that. Because like you wouldn't push an animal at that point. You wouldn't push a child at that point. You would allow that moment of safety, the moment of safety in which maybe the possibility of, oh, maybe I can, comes out, but it comes out organically and invitationally. It's not a driver or a pressure.
Exactly.
So coming back to your autobiographical layers, you were saying how there was that moment where you just kind of surrendered to it. And there was that moment where you thought, okay, I'm going to meditate for spiritual evolution. This isn't about getting well. This is something more profound. And then lo and behold, you found that healing began to open up differently. And then you were talking about bringing in all the layers of the embodied work, the kind of physiological stuff. So where did you go after that, Patricia? Where did it start to unfold into then?
I think that part of it is actually time in terms of if we're just speaking about recovery or whatever, we'll just do it at that level. Part of it was just time doing the things that were supportive and not, and just being consistent and patient, without expecting results, like doing things because I knew, this is like doing things out of love and not achievement, or, a sort of achievement oriented. And so I think that was a big part of it, was because sometimes I look back and I'm like, well, why do I feel so much better this year than last year? I don't feel like I'm doing anything different. Well, I've had another year of all these supportive practices. The other thing that did turn out to be important for me, though, personally, to finally get past, I think I got to about 70%, and I just couldn't bridge that last gap to be able to. And let me tell you, this is one of the things, though, that I want to say is, to your point about, the possibility of having joy and a deep, satisfying life, no matter where we are. Like, really, even if we're bedbound, as crazy as that sounds, that is still a possibility for us as human beings. And so the kind of gratitude that I had for the very small things that I could start doing, like spending time with my nieces and enjoying it, like not spending time because I want to do this, so I'm going to push and feel horrible the whole time, right? But but just having that possibility of doing these simple things and feeling good, like I'm so grateful for my life now. I just want to say that, and I don't need to go back. I have zero desire to go back to the person I was before. I have no desire to be the person working 80-hour weeks or whatever else, was on my, was part of my life back then. And so I guess what I'm saying is, I think that even though I was at like maybe 70%, and I'm talking about trying to get to 100, I don't want that to sound like, well, you have to get 100% better before your life can be good or whatever else. Like, there was always there was like this really, really steady progression. But the last piece that was important for me was the trauma work. I needed to do that. And the thing is, I had done it before, like I had been in therapy for a long time, and I had even done experiential week-long retreats where you're living in, and it's deep trauma work and blah, blah, blah. So I would have thought that I had done it and that you could check that box. But for a variety of reasons, it probably part of it just wasn't really that, like, the talk therapy wasn't really that support. This is a long time ago. We weren't doing much somatic stuff at the time. The experiential retreat, yes, there was more somatic stuff, but there wasn't the consistency afterwards. I wasn't continuing to work with it. It was just like this once and done thing. And so there might've been reasons, but I needed to get that. I needed to give that attention, and I needed to, and I don't want to, say this as if, again, it's like the silver bullet thing. I needed to find the right person who could help me with it. Because I had done a lot of the work before, and it just didn't, I hadn't had the transformation, from that work.
Getting the right practitioner is key. Absolutely key. I mean, because there are lots of therapists out there. Not all therapy is great. Not all counselling is great. Not all coaching is great. And sometimes finding the right person who has the skill, the attunement, the intuition, the experience, and the capacity to really hold you in a way that feels deeply safe and go there with you in a way that enables it to become transformative, I think, is key as well. I mean, I also had lots of very deep trauma kind of stuff to deal with. And, the depths you can go to psychically when you feel that you're held by someone who normalizes your experience, but at the same time allows you to dissipate and to do all the memory reconsolidation work and everything that goes on anyway at the kind of neuroscience level, but a deep sense of someone who's radically attuned. And sometimes it's the somatic holding, the sensory going in work is just beautiful, because it's the kind of transformative listening with the body, listening through the body, and with a co-regulative nervous system.
Yes, that's right.
becomes so profoundly safe that you start to unfurl and bring out these things that you were unconsciously suppressing and holding in shadow because they were too frightening to look at, the dreaded experience. And at the end of the day, of course, it's our own experience that we're frightened of. You know, the trauma lives in the present tense in the body.
That's right. That's exactly.
But it's our own experience that we're afraid of in that situation that we need to help, you know, allowing the body to release intelligence. See, to me, that comes back as well to the wisest of meditation practices, where it ties together what you were saying about even if you're in a bed, you know, you can have there's a kind of unconditionality in really good therapeutic work, and there's a kind of unconditionality in really profound spiritual transformation, and actually are kind of one and the same thing, because, you know, the spiritual journey invites us to allow the inner crap, the pain, the distortions, the stories, the reactivities, the patterns, to allow those to release in ways that enables the basically blissful nature of our true nature to emerge progressively. And that leads to an unconditional contentment, so that no matter what we're doing, no matter what we're feeling, there's an unconditional contentment around even intense emotional experiences in which that arises. And we become that space of healing, don't we? We become that space in which those things come up for air.
And there needs to be the capacity to hold it, as you said. And that's sort of like the container needs to be. And this speaks to resilience. This also speaks to, you know, the physical and emotional and psychological resilience, you know, that can allow. And Gabor Mate actually, when he describes trauma, and just getting back to your point where it's not the event. It's not, you know, trauma is not what happened to us. It's what happened inside us as the result. And it's what we're carrying, what we're still carrying. So actually, technically, some of us don't ever need to go back to the act. Well, all we need to do is work with what's here now. You know, what is here now? But our inability to witness our own pain is in itself the response to trauma, right? And that emotional maturity, it really is a type of maturity, needs to be developed so that we're not crushed when this stuff comes up. That's why we suppressed it in the first place, because it was more than we could handle.
Exactly.
So we build the container, and then we can be a compassionate witness, and then it can, you know, be healed and released, transformed. Yeah.
There's that thing, isn't there? What I couldn't bear at 2, my wise adult now can hold safely, and teach that little inner 2-year-old, which exists in a neural cluster somewhere, that actually it's fine to feel that feeling.
Absolutely. It's not going to kill you. You're perfectly safe. It's just, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it moves through the neurology quite fast when we're not holding it in with a story loop or a narrative or some other way of holding it in. Once we fall back and surrender and open and allow it to move up, it moves through quite quickly. It might get white hot on the way. But it moves through relatively quickly. And I think that art of expanding around with attunement, as you say, holding, becoming the space in which those things safely emerge. To me, that's an important part of the therapeutic process, is learning how to do that for yourself.
Exactly.
You do that for yourself.
Yes. And so first you do it with others. And sometimes, so I think that's really important. So the whole co-regulation piece, especially when we're carrying this stuff and we've, you know, because basically that's what happened. Like, children cannot regulate their own nervous systems. They need adults. They need adults to co-regulate. So if we as children never had an adult that did that, we could be walking around in a 20, 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old body, still unable to regulate our own nervous systems, because we never had that experience as children, and we never learned how to do it. We can learn how to do it now. And part of that is being co-regulating with others and then learning how to do it for ourselves. And then we can continue this therapeutic work. We can be our own, can become our own therapist, so to speak, or our own, Ashok Gupta calls it the loving wise self, right? That just shows up and puts the arms around, or whatever. We can be whatever, we can support ourselves in that way. And then maybe some things do come up that are like, whoa, this is too much for me. I'm still not there yet. All right, let me bring in my resources. What are my resources that can help me hold this? That's still, even though I can handle all these things on my own, this is a little too big. And again, your body will tell you. So this is why we have to respect resistances. Resistances are intelligent. They're intelligent. And when we push past them, there's usually a reason, or I'm going to say there's always a reason, for these resistances. And so when we respect them and allow them to open in their own time.
Absolutely. And it comes back, doesn't it? It's kind of where we started with the kind of multiple intelligence of all that's at work in us and around us. And that place, I guess, of acceptance, of just being open there with what is in this kind of, potentially really wise, attuned and loving way. And then we heal not only ourselves, but our relationships, our dynamics, and ultimately, again, the fatigue community, coming back to where we went as well, is the invitation for us collectively to encourage each other in this deeper role that perhaps we're playing in the 21st century. Which is probably a good point to end on.
Good. It was lovely to talk to you.
And you, Patricia, thank you so much.